In 2017, I ran my first ever proper race. It was a half marathon, and I spent the entire week before it binge eating. I brushed it off as carb loading. I made it seem like a joke. I laughed it off all the time, like, haha, you know, check me doing all this carb loading, like I'm gonna be a machine, like, you know, LOL type of thing. But it wasn't a joke. It was actually far from it, because deep inside I was actually drowning. Now back then I didn't really know what carb loading looked like, because I didn't really know that much about running. I just knew that I was going to be running a half marathon, which, to be fair, I hadn't prepared very well for, and I knew that that was going to be expending a lot of energy, and essentially I saw that as an excuse or a reason at the time to just press the fuck it button and give myself almost like a green card to do whatever the fuck I wanted with food and binge the entire week. Now the race was on the Sunday, and from the Monday, literally from the moment I woke up, like I just remember this constant feeling of like stress and anxiety and tension, but also like excitement, because I was like, well, I'm going to be running this half marathon at the end of the week, and like people do this carb loading thing, you know, I'd seen that people had like pizza the night before the race, so I knew I was going to be doing that. But it was like giving myself this permission, for the first time ever, by the way, since struggling with binge eating, to just do whatever the fuck I wanted to do that week. I literally had as much bread as I wanted to. I didn't really track my calories that week. I wasn't paying any attention to what I was eating. I was just like going, you know, do I fancy a packet of Oreos? Let's have a packet of Oreos. Do I fancy an entire packet of bourbon biscuits? Of course, let's go for it. And every single time I went to make these sorts of food decisions, like I could feel the tension in my body. I felt the anxiety. It was like that vertigo feeling that you get, you know, right before you're going to go down on a roller coaster, just like that tipping edge anxiety of knowing that I was going to do something that I was going to regret, something that deep down was making me feel disgusted at myself, ashamed of myself, worried that I was going to be this fatty on the, you know, beginning of the start line. Like, not that it matters, but to me it mattered, right? I was so stressed. I would panic about whether I would be feeling fat during my race, whether my leggings would be pressing into my stomach. And that wasn't enough to stop me from basically going hell for leather on these binges, because for the first time, essentially, I was actually giving myself permission to give into it. And the most interesting thing about it is that back then is when I was probably at the height of my most rigid, most disciplined food rule following that I've ever been in my life, even more than when I was a competitive bodybuilder, because I was carb cycling for once. I was having high carbohydrate days, low carbohydrate days throughout the week, and, you know, matching calories with like fats and manipulating all these things. I was intermittently fasting, and I was obviously macro tracking, calorie tracking, and doing basically backflip gymnastics and all sorts of mental, I don't know, games to somehow survive and somehow keep myself in check with food. And this is a time in which all of those discipline rules still weren't enough to stop me from binge eating the shit out of that entire week, because of how anxious and stressed I was, and also because I felt like I was finally able to, like I had a reason to, I had a legitimate excuse to be binging, and no one was going to be judging me for eating all the carbohydrates that I was eating, because I was carb loading. That's what I was doing, right? Interestingly, now, at the time of recording, it's the 19th of August, and I'm currently 3 days out from my next upcoming race. I'm doing Wild Hybrid, which isn't a half marathon, but it involves 10 kilometers of running with some fitness stations in between. And nearly a decade has passed, and although food has been an important part of my preparation this week, the relationship that I have with food and with myself is obviously so completely and vastly different that I barely even recognize that younger version of me, even though when I think back to her, like I still feel and recognize all the pain and suffering that she was really going through when she was struggling so much with food, with binging, with emotional eating, with comfort eating, with all of those things. Food now isn't like the enemy, it's not a punishment, it's not a reward. It is food, and it's something that I get to, you know, consume for fuel and also for fun reasons. And so over the course of the last couple of days at least, I have been eating, as I always do, a mix of proteins, carbohydrates and fats in all of my meals. I'll put some pictures on the screen so you can get a sense of like what I've been eating. And the main aim has just been to like eat to my needs, like get myself ready, get myself rested, get myself recovered. Obviously I've been tapering my training, so like the intensity of my training has dropped significantly, which has been very welcome because I have been tired. And I'm not doing the whole thing that I used to do, which would be like panic, try to compensate for all the food that I'm eating. Like, I mean, even when I think back to it now, it's just coming to me as I'm talking about it. But in that week where I was binging every single day, like I did more running that week in the lead up to the actual half marathon than I did in the months preceding it, knowing that I had that race coming up, which tells you everything about how intertwined my eating was with my training, and like how hard I tried to compensate for the food that I was consuming with exercise. And it was just this constant battle of like binge, restrict, compensate over and over and over again at a time in which I was allegedly at my most disciplined with my food rules. Go figure. So yeah, in a way, like a decade later, my preparations for a race look so completely different, because I'm almost like eating a little bit more than I ordinarily would, and I'm training significantly less, but I don't feel any kind of way about it other than just like, this is what I need to do, and this is a pragmatic thing to do, and this is a sensible thing to do. But like, there's no inner chatter, monologue, hate, shame, threat, disgust. None of that is there anymore. So aside from time passing, what actually changed for me between that 2017 version of me and me now? How was it that I was able to take myself from such a low point of binge eating all of the time and essentially spending an entire week eating whatever the fuck I wanted in a completely disinhibited and erratic and stressed way, to now being able to just eat as a means to prepare myself for this race without having to really think much of it other than what do I need right now and what's going to help me feel my best? Well, for one, I don't approach my food and my nutrition with any kind of discipline. It's the opposite, actually. I don't have any food rules for myself. For the most part, I go by making sure that I'm eating for fuel and for fun reasons. I also make sure that if I have something that I really want that maybe isn't aligned with like, we're super healthy, whatever, that I also take into consideration what I might need. For example, my husband and I went out for a coffee and pastry on Sunday, and I wanted that pastry and it was delicious and it was super tasty, but it meant that I didn't have my normal mid-afternoon snack, which has a little bit higher protein, which meant that I had a bit more protein with my dinner later on in the day. Like, it is as simple as that. But yeah, the real thing that changed for me was obviously my relationship with myself and my relationship with food. I mean, at the time, I did not have any coping skills. I was overwhelmed as hell. I've always been a perfectionist, and so I was going through a transition coming out of uni, going into my master's year, and I was deep in the trenches of trying to find myself, and I felt consistently not good enough. And I didn't know how to cope with that. And so the way that I'd always coped with not feeling good enough was by setting myself really perfectionistic, rigid goals. And of course that manifested in my expectations for academia, but also in my expectations for myself, for how I wanted my body to look, for how I expected myself to exercise, for how I expected myself to eat. And so as a result of that, it's almost like all the pressure that I put on myself, I couldn't cope with, for one. And yet the only tools that I had to cope with it was eating. I didn't have any additional self-regulation skills, which put me in this really tricky position in which I was expecting myself to be perfect with food, but all that pressure that I was putting myself trying to be perfect with food and with my body and how I exercise would lead me to not cope and feel like the pressure was too much. And what I did when the pressure was too much was I would eat. And so that got me tangled up in this like horrific shame spiral that I didn't know how to break out of. And so what's changed between then and now is that I have done so much work on my self-esteem. I have really tried to explore my self-worth and get to understand where some of those thoughts came from and build myself from the ground up. Obviously being a psychologist makes a huge difference in that too. And you know, the skills that I've learned as I've trained to be a psychologist have massively helped me be able to do that in a really sort of, I guess, authentic, not to overuse the word, but in a really authentic way, in a way that feels like I can then come on here and talk to you about it with integrity, and also practice that, you know, in day-to-day life with my clients with integrity. The other thing that's changed is that the way that I approach my life is based on my values, as opposed to specific outcome goals and wanting to look a certain way. I always think about how do I want to live my life, and how as health and fitness and eating and exercising going to add to my life as opposed to take away from it. Because before I would pursue, you know, thinness, I would pursue perfection with food and, you know, being super healthy and all these things at the cost of everything. I have missed out on so many things by trying to be perfect and disciplined with food and with exercise, which would then lead me to press the fuck up button, understandably so. But now I approach it with a much more relaxed openness, and that gives me so much more freedom to know that it's actually not the end of the world if I have something flexible, and also that food is something that I can become non-attached to because I'm not prohibiting it from myself. I'm just like allowing myself to live my life, and food just happens to be a part of what I'm doing day to day. It's just something that I do in such a way that feels aligned to my values and to the type of person that I want to be, which doesn't really change that much day to day to it being race week, to be honest. So yeah, it's not that in 2017 I was weak and undisciplined. It's just that I didn't have any coping skills to tolerate the unbearable feeling of not feeling good enough in anything that I was doing, because my self-esteem and self-worth were non-existent in many ways. And food was something that helped me cope with that, but it also fueled the cycle because it made me feel not good enough. And so actually learning to work on my self-esteem and working on my self-esteem, like I said, was the transformative piece for me. That, identifying my values, and also actually learning skills to self-regulate when I was feeling stressed, so that I didn't then have to rely on food to cope and to manage and to appease my emotions, was absolutely fundamental to me. And so if you're in the 2017 version of me, I'm making this video to remind you that like it does get better. It can get better. I mean, I'm proof of it. I did not think that living the way that I live my life now was possible. Like, it was unfathomable to, I mean, I couldn't even picture myself having freedom around food, like not comfort eating, not feeling like I had to constantly control myself around food because food had so much control over me. I'm proof that things can get better. But the changes that I was able to make to my life and to my mindset, they weren't random. They came from structured, evidence-based support. And this is what I help my clients with day in, day out. I have kind of made it my job, but I've not made it up because I have gone and studied and done the thing. And so my personal experience does help, but it's not the thing that informs how I can support you or how I support my clients in overcoming the same struggles that I suffered through for so many years. If that story resonates, if you've been in a similar place, or if that is exactly where you are right now, and you're recognizing that building your self-esteem is something that's really important because it's getting in the way and it's making you binge and it's making you struggle with these things over and over, then you can download my free self-esteem builder from the link in the description. It's a 4-week course that will teach you the exact steps I followed to be able to get myself to this place. From the description, you can also download my emotional eating stopper, which is basically like a 5-minute step-by-step of what to do whenever your hand is about to press on the fuck it button. Essentially like what I wish I'd had when I was walking over to Tesco those many times after work before going home to buy myself a full packet of bourbon biscuits, a full packet of Oreos that I was going to eat in the 5-minute walk that it would take me to get from the shops to my house completely in secret. I wish I'd had something like that. That's exactly why I created it. And ultimately, if you want to work with me and actually get to the root cause of why you keep comfort eating, of why you keep emotionally eating, of why you never feel good enough, and why you cannot seem to get out of the cycle no matter how hard you try, you need to be subscribed to my email list, because in a couple of days I'm going to be announcing a program that's going to be starting at the beginning of October that is literally designed to help you break out of this exact cycle that I've been in, that so many people are in, and that you're in right now, once and for all. Making this video really helped me reflect on the pride that I have for myself and for the part of me that like continue to show up and continue to work on developing a better relationship with itself, because I now get to enjoy race week and I now get to enjoy showing up, performing at my best, and having a great time at an event. So I can't wait to tell you a bit more about how the Wild Hybrid event actually goes in next week's Saturday video. And as always, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future uploads, and I'll see you in the next one.